Space battles are a lot like bar fights. There's a lot of shouting, someone usually loses a tooth, and in the end, you're left nursing more than just your pride. Captain Jack's Meridian was living proof of that metaphor, currently nursing a black eye and an ego slightly larger than the planetary body he was orbiting. "So, what's the damage then?" Jax asked, prodding at the bruise blooming under his eye. It was a spectacular shiner, all purple and yellow like an interstellar fruit salad left out to rot. "We've got a hull breach in Sector 4, and I think the coffee machine's dead," said Slip, the ship's mechanic/barista. Slip was a wiry figure, one of those guys who looked like he could do with a good meal and a nap, but with an energy suggesting he thrived on caffeine and sheer spite. "Great," Jax muttered. "Just as long as the Vorax don't demand we serve them a cappuccino before they blast us to hell." The Nebula's Wrath was a mercenary ship, with an illustrious past as a cargo hauler and an even more illustrious penchant for getting into trouble. The crew was a ragtag bunch of misfits, the kind of people who couldn't fit in anywhere else and didn't really want to. There was Doc, the ship's medic, who had a bedside manner that could only be described as grudgingly attentive. Then there was Kira, the navigator, with a voice like a razor blade wrapped in velvet, who could sweet-talk a star out of its orbit. Last but not least was Grizz, the gunner, who believed in solving problems with an alarming amount of firepower, usually before anyone had a chance to point out there might be, in fact, a less violent solution. "What's the plan, Captain?" Kira asked, leaning against the console with the studied nonchalance of someone who'd seen it all and was a bit disappointed by the encore. "Plan," Jax snorted. "Look pretty, act dumb, and hope we shoot first." "Charming," she replied, rolling her eyes. "But seriously, we've got Vorax up ahead and they're blocking the wormhole. We're talking blockade, rationing supplies, and generally being about as welcome as a space flu." Ah, the Vorax. A delightful species known for their charming personalities and love of bureaucratic red tape. Picture a reptilian accountant with a sadistic streak and you've got a pretty good idea. "They're taxing every ship that passes through," Grizz growled, his hands twitching towards his holster. "Heard they're asking for a toll so high, even the pirates are complaining." "Yeah, it's like they're trying to run an intergalactic protection racket," Slip chimed in, fiddling with a wrench. "Pay us or else, and the or else usually involves a lot of pew-pew and less of you." Jax sighed, rubbing at his temples. "Well, we're no good to anyone stuck here. Let's see what's behind door number certain doom." The Nebula's Wrath coasted silently toward the wormhole, her engines humming quietly like a cat ready to pounce. The sleek lines of the ship were marred by dents and scorch marks, testament to many a narrow escape and more than a few bad decisions. The Vorax blockade was visible on the radar, a cluster of warships parked like they owned the place, which technically they did now, thanks to the Empire's expansionist policies. "Time to make nice," Jax grumbled, flipping open the comms channel. Nebula's Wrath to Vorax command, requesting passage through the wormhole. There was a pause, the kind that made you feel like the universe was holding its breath. Then a voice crackled through, oily and dispassionate. "Identify yourself and state your business." "Captain Jax Meridian, here to—" "Well, not die today, preferably," Jax replied, trying for charm but landing somewhere between sarcastic and suicidal. "Just passing through, promise not to loot or pillage or any of that fun stuff." The Vorax officer on the other end of the line was silent for a moment, probably weighing the entertainment value of blasting them to bits versus the paperwork involved. Finally, he spoke. "Toll is 10,000 credits. No negotiation." "Well, that's a bit steep for a joyride," Jax said, glancing at Slip, who was currently mouthing a string of expletives that would make a sailor blush. "Failure to pay will result in confiscation and destruction of your vessel." "Charming fellow, isn't he?" Kira whispered. "What do we do now, Captain?" Grizz asked, already starting to power up the weapons systems, his fingers itching for action. Jax considered their options, which were about as plentiful as a bald hedgehog's hair products. "Stall them," he decided. Tell them the credits are on their way, but our accountant's having a mild breakdown. Doc snorted. Mild? Slip's about to have a full-blown aneurysm at the thought of coughing up 10 grand. Hey. I resemble that remark, Slip retorted, scowling as best he could while holding a cup of coffee that looked like it had been made from engine runoff. The Vorax comms officer's irritation was almost palpable over the radio. You have 10 minutes to comply or face the consequences. Consequences, Jax muttered after the comms cut off. Seems like we're always running into those. What now? Kira asked, arching an eyebrow. Well, we could always try the old look over their trick, Jax suggested. A classic, Grizz said, nodding approvingly. Was thinking more along the lines of blow them up and run like hell. Jax sighed, running a hand through his hair. Let's see if we can't manage a happy medium between subtlety and outright war. They had 9 minutes left when Jax finally had a plan, or something resembling one. All right, Slip. I need you to rig the comms to loop a signal, make it sound like we're sending the creds through. Meanwhile, Grizz, be ready to make things explode at a moment's notice. My favorite kind of notice, Grizz grinned, cracking his knuckles. Doc, be ready with the medkit in case this goes south, Jax continued, ignoring the dry look from Doc that said it always went south. And what about me? Kira asked. You're going to be our getaway driver, Jax said. Get us through that wormhole as soon as the fireworks start. Slip was already hard at work, fingers flying over the console like a man possessed. Give me a sec and we'll have them thinking we're cleaning out our imaginary bank account. The minutes ticked by, tension coiling tighter than a spring. Jax watched the Vorax ships on the screen, knowing that the instant they figured out the ruse, things would get ugly. Signals looping, Slip said finally, his voice tight with concentration. All right, Grizz, Jax said, eyes narrowing. Showtime. Grizz's hands moved over the controls, and the Nebula's Wrath's guns sprang to life. The first shot streaked through space, slamming into the Vorax vessels with a satisfying boom that echoed through the ship. Hit him again, Jax shouted, feeling the adrenaline surge as the Vorax scrambled to respond. Kira was already moving, the ship weaving through the chaos as Grizz laid down covering fire. The wormhole loomed ahead, a swirling vortex that promised either escape or oblivion. We're going through, Jax yelled, holding on as Kira gunned the engines. The Nebula's Wrath shot into the wormhole, the swirling colors of space-time wrapping around them like a kaleidoscope on a bad acid trip. For a moment, it felt like being inside a blender set on disintegrate. And then they were through, the ship shuddering as they emerged on the other side. Well, that went well, Grizz said, leaning back and taking a swig from a flask that probably contained something stronger than coffee. Define well, Slip muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. We're alive, aren't we? Jax said, his grin sharp and slightly manic. And we've managed to piss off the Vorax without getting vaporized. I'd call that a win, Kira chuckled, shaking her head. You're insane, you know that. Only on days ending in Y, Jax replied smugly. But as the adrenaline ebbed away, Jax couldn't shake the feeling of unease settling in the pit of his stomach. They'd escaped for now, but the Vorax wouldn't forget this little encounter, and the next time they might not get so lucky. So, Doc said, breaking the silence. Anyone up for a round of cards? Jax chuckled, the tension easing slightly. Why not? Let's see if today's luck holds. As the crew settled in, the Vorax blockade felt like a distant memory, but Jax knew better than to let his guard down. They'd won this round, but the game was far from over. To surviving, Slip said, raising his cup in a toast. And to making the Vorax's lives a little more miserable, Grizz added, clinking his flask against Slip's mug. Jax couldn't help but smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. To us, he said, feeling the familiar burn of alcohol slide down his throat. And whatever comes next. But as the ship drifted through the stars, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. And if the Vorax had their way, things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. As the crew of the Nebula's Wrath settled down with their drinks and cards, their brief reprieve felt like a band-aid on a bullet wound. Jax knew the Vorax weren't the type to let a little skirmish slide. But for now, the priority was to catch their breath and maybe, just maybe, avoid a mutiny over their dwindling coffee reserves. The ship's interior was a patchwork of repairs and jury-rigged systems, a testament to Slip's enthusiastic, if not always successful, tinkering. The main console was adorned with sticky notes full of outdated codes and half-scribbled reminders. It all looked like the aftermath of a stationery store explosion. "Anyone else find it suspiciously quiet?" Kira said, eyes flicking around the room as she shuffled the deck. "Feels like the universe is holding its breath, waiting to drop something nasty on us." Jack smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Probably just saving up for a real doozy. Besides, we're long overdue for a proper catastrophe." "Amen to that," Slip muttered, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "Ever since the coffee machine went on protest, I've been expecting doom. Can't fight evil on an empty caffeine tank. Not without consequences," Doc added, shuffling through his medkit with the precision of a man who knew his patience came pre-broken. The comms suddenly crackled to life, cutting through the camaraderie like a knife through butter. The voice that spilled through was one they didn't recognize, but it bore the universal tone of someone who thought they were about to ruin your day. "This is an automated message from the Grand Vorax expansionary fleet," the voice announced, each word dripping with oily superiority. "All vessels within the designated sectors are hereby informed of forthcoming operations. Non-compliance will result in immediate and unpleasant consequences." "Can they lay off the consequences for 5 minutes?" Grizz grumbled, tossing his cards on the table. "It's like they don't know any other words. Probably replace their thesaurus with a weapons manual," Kira suggested dryly. "The Vorax aren't exactly known for their expansive vocabulary," Jack said, though his mind was already churning, piecing together the implications. "But this sounds bigger than their usual shakedown." "Expansionary fleet," Slip repeated, a note of awe in his voice. "That's not just a couple of ships, that's a full-scale invasion plan. Which means," Jax continued, "they've got their beady eyes on something valuable, and knowing our luck, it's bound to affect us." Kira leaned back, crossing her arms. "You think it's Earth they're after? I mean, we've got the best bad TV in the galaxy, but still." "Earth strategically significant," Doc pointed out. "It's the gateway to half the known trade routes. Cut that off and you're talking economic chaos." "And where there's chaos," Grizz said, grinning, "there's opportunity." "Only if you survive it," Jack said grimly. He tapped his fingers on the comms console, contemplating their next move. "We need more intel. We need to know what the Vorax are planning and how we can screw it up for them." Kira raised an eyebrow. "You in the mood for some espionage, Captain?" "It's either that or wait for them to turn us into scrap metal," Jax replied. "I'd rather take the fight to their doorstep, even if that means ringing the doorbell and running away." Slip shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "And here I thought today was going to be boring." "All right," Jax said, standing up. "Let's get to it. Slip, see what you can dig up from the local networks. Kira, plot us a course that keeps us under the radar. Doc, make sure we don't get ourselves killed too quickly." "Consider it done," Doc said with a wry smile. Grizz cracked his knuckles. "And what about me, Captain?" "You just keep those guns ready," Jax said. "I have a feeling we're going to need them." As the crew dispersed to their tasks, Jax lingered a moment longer, staring out at the stars. The vast emptiness was deceptive, hiding threats and secrets in its cold embrace. But if there was one thing he knew, it was that humans had a knack for turning the tables when least expected. The Vorax might have a fleet, but they were about to find out why poking a bear was never a sensible career move. The hum of the nebula's wrath as it coasted through space was almost comforting, like the purr of a giant metal cat that occasionally spit fire and death. In the cockpit, Kira navigated the ship with a casual precision, her fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist at a particularly grumpy symphony. "We've got some chatter on the local frequencies," Slip's voice crackled over the internal comms. "Looks like the Vorax are prepping for something big. Lots of troop movements and requisition orders. Any mention of a weakness, a chink in their scaly armor? Jax asked, leaning over the console to examine the data Slip had pulled. Not yet, but give me time, Slip replied. Every fortress has a weak spot. Even if I have to invent one. Make it quick, Jax said. I don't fancy turning into space debris. Gotcha, Captain, Slip said. If they've got any skeletons in their closet, figuratively speaking, I'll dig 'em up. As Jax paused to consider their options, Kira shot him a sidelong glance. You know, one of these days your luck's going to run out. Probably, Jax agreed with a shrug. But that's a problem for future us, not right now us. Kira chuckled, shaking her head. You've got a funny way of looking at things, Captain. Occupational hazard, Jax replied. If you can't laugh in the face of doom, then what's the point? Point taken, she said, her expression softening for a moment. As they continued on their way, Slip's voice came through again, this time more urgent. Hey, Captain, I think I found something. Looks like the Vorax have a staging area on the edge of the Vortex Nebula. They're gathering supplies and troops there. Perfect, Jax said, nodding. That's where we'll start poking around. Grizz sauntered over, having overheard the conversation. So we're heading straight into the lion's den? Pretty much, Jax confirmed. Thoughts? Grizz grinned. Just the way I like it. As they set a course for the Vortex Nebula, Jax couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation. This was what they did best, running headlong into danger with no real plan, just a hope and a prayer that somehow they'd come out the other side. The Vortex Nebula loomed ahead, a swirling mass of colors that looked deceptively beautiful from a distance. Up close, it was a death trap of gravitational anomalies and electromagnetic interference, like a cosmic haunted house where the doors never led where you expected. Looks cozy, Kira commented, as they drew closer, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Like a warm hug from a black hole, Jax replied, eyes scanning the myriad of ships clustered around the nebula's edge, all sporting the Vorax insignia. Let's see if we can slip in without starting a war. Always a good plan, Grizz said, though there was a spark of excitement in his eyes. Slip, Jax called over the comms. Time to work your magic, get us a backdoor into their networks. Already on it, Slip replied. And by magic you mean borderline illegal hacking, right? Exactly, Jax said with a grin. The illegaler, the better. As Slip got to work, Kira guided the nebula's wrath into a holding pattern, skirting the nebula's more dangerous fringes. The ship shuddered slightly as it passed through pockets of turbulence, but held steady. Got a lot of Vorax chatter here, Slip reported. Looks like they're planning to rope in some big players for this operation. If they pull it off, Earth's going to be cut off faster than a corporate budget. Guess it's up to us to make sure that doesn't happen, Jax said. Find me something we can use. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the engines and the occasional beeping of the console. Then Slip's voice broke through, triumphant. Bingo! I've got troop schedules, supply lines, even a few poorly secured power grid blueprints. These guys are planning a full-scale lockdown of the sector. That's our ticket, Jax said, leaning back. Let's see how they like playing defense when we hit them where it hurts. So, sabotage, Grizz asked, an eager gleam in his eye. Surgical sabotage, Jax corrected. We're not aiming to start an interstellar war, just make them reconsider their life choices. Fair enough, Grizz said, looking slightly disappointed. With a plan forming in his mind, Jax turned his attention back to the nebula. It was a long shot, but if they could pull it off, they might just buy Earth some time. Maybe even enough to rally some support from the more sympathetic parts of the galaxy. All right, crew, Jax said, gathering them around. Here's what we're going to do. The plan, like most great plans, was simple. Get in, cause chaos, and get out before the Vorax really knew what hit them. Slip would handle the cyber assault, while Grizz prepared for more immediate destruction. Meanwhile, Kira would keep the nebula's wrath ready for a quick escape. As they set their plan in motion, Jax couldn't help but feel a familiar thrill of excitement mixed with the ever-present tension of potential disaster. It was the kind of feeling that reminded him why he loved this life. As the nebula's wrath dove into the fray, The Vorax would learn a lesson they should have known all along. Never underestimate a crew of humans with nothing to lose and a galaxy of reasons to fight. And with any luck, they'd live to see another day with a few more tales to add to their ever-growing collection of ill-advised adventures. The nebula's wrath hummed with tension. A big, menacing hunk of metal filled with a crew that couldn't agree on what to have for breakfast, let alone how to pull off an interstellar heist. Jax Meridian stood in the cockpit, staring out at the Vortex Nebula, which looked like the love child of a hurricane and a disco ball. It was all colors and chaos, a celestial middle finger to anyone stupid enough to get close. Slip, you sure you can hack into their systems without setting off every alarm from here to Andromeda? Jax asked, his voice laced with the kind of optimism that knew how quickly optimism could get its teeth kicked in. Slip snorted from his corner of wires and screens. Captain, have a little faith. I'll be as quiet as a space mouse. Space mice don't exist, Kira muttered, not even looking up from her navigation console. Her tone was drier than a TRAPPIST-1 desert planet, and if they did, they'd probably have bigger balls than you. Thanks for the support, Slip replied, flicking through screens of Vorax-coded gibberish. Remind me to send you a gift card if we survive. Enough of the love fest, Jax interrupted, shooting them both a look that couldn't decide whether it was annoyed or amused. We've got a job to do, and I don't want to end up as a smear on some Vorax windshield. Just keep us steady, Grizz said. He was polishing one of his many guns, a ritual that seemed to calm him as much as it unnerved everyone else. I'm itching for some action. You always are, Doc pointed out from his perch on a crate of dubious medical supplies. He was the kind of doctor who'd patch you up just enough that you could limp back into the fight. Just remember, I'm not a miracle worker. I've got duct tape and hope, and I'm running low on both. Noted, Jax said. He turned his attention back to the looming nebula, its swirling mass of colors, a deceptive curtain behind which the Vorax horde lay in wait. All right, team, let's go ruin the day of some overconfident reptilian bastards. The plan was straightforward, in the way that jumping off a cliff is straightforward. Get in, make a mess, and get out before anyone realized what was happening. Jax had led the crew through countless scrapes like this, but the Vorax were a new level of crazy, armed to the teeth with tech that made their human counterparts look like cavemen with sticks. As the ship drifted closer to the Vorax staging area, Slip's fingers danced across his console, tapping into the enemy systems. The data streams were a tangled mess of Vorax military jargon and heavily encrypted codes. Got something, Slip said, squinting at his screen. Troop movements, supply lines, and bingo, a lovely little backdoor into their power grid. Good work, Jax said. Time to put that to use. Grizz, how's our little care package looking? Kira asked, nodding toward the rear of the ship where Grizz was preparing a sabotage device. It was a bomb, but Grizz liked to call them motivational tools. All set, Grizz rumbled. Ready to deliver a message they won't forget. Hopefully it's not kaboom, we're idiots, Doc chimed in, but his smirk suggested he wasn't entirely against the idea. The ship slid into position, barely a blip on the Vorax radar thanks to Slip's hacking. Kira guided them with deft precision, weaving through the electromagnetic chaos of the nebula like a seamstress on a cosmic quilt. Deploying the package, Grizz announced, pressing a button that sent the device floating toward the Vorax power grid. And delivered. Let's hope they sign for it, Kira said, eyes never leaving her controls. For a moment, everything was quiet, peaceful even. The kind of quiet that makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, things are going too well. Then the alarm started. Captain, Slip's voice was suddenly higher, laced with an edge of panic. We've got a problem. What kind of problem? Jax asked, though he already knew the answer wasn't going to be the good kind. Looks like the Vorax upgraded their systems, Slip said, furiously typing. They've got countermeasures I didn't account for. We're locked into their tactical grid. Jax swore under his breath. Of course the Vorax wouldn't just sit around waiting to be blown up. They were smarter than that, Kira, we need to move now. I'm trying, Kira snapped, hands flying over the controls. But their systems are holding us in place. Grizz, can you give us some firepower? Jax asked, his mind racing. Grizz was already at his post, targeting the Vorax ships that were closing in. With pleasure, the ship rocked as Grizz unleashed a volley of laser fire, the blasts lighting up the nebula like an impromptu fireworks show. The Vorax scrambled, their sleek ships weaving through the chaos, returning fire with deadly accuracy. "Slip, get us out of this mess," Jax yelled over the din of alarms and gunfire. "I'm working on it," Slip shouted back, fingers blurred as he hacked their systems with the desperation of a man who'd misplaced his underwear on laundry day. The nebula's wrath shuddered under the barrage, the ship's patched-together hull complaining loudly. Sparks flew from the console as systems overloaded, filling the cockpit with the acrid smell of burnt circuits. "Doc, how are we holding up?" Jax called, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. "Like a drunk in a bar fight," Doc replied, strapping himself in. "We're taking damage, but nothing critical yet. Just don't ask the coffee machine for miracles. If we get out of this alive, cough is on me," Jax promised, though he doubted even caffeine could fix the mess they were in. Kira wrestled with the controls, her face a mask of concentration. "I've got a break in their hold. Hang on." With a lurch, the ship broke free, diving through the nebula like a bat out of hell. The Vorax ships pursued, but Kira flew like a woman possessed, threading the nebula's gravitational anomalies with a grace that was almost poetic, if you were into that sort of thing. Behind them, the Vorax power grid exploded in a spectacular display of fire and fury, their motivational tool having done its job, but the victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the damage the nebula's wrath had sustained. "We're clear," Kira announced, though the triumph in her voice was tempered by exhaustion. "For now," Jax said, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "But they're not going to forget this. And neither will we," Slip said, slumping in his chair, looking like he'd just run a marathon in a sauna. "You did good, Slip," Jax said, clapping him on the shoulder. "All of you did. Let's get somewhere safe and figure out our next move." As the ship limped away from the nebula, the crew settled into a tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The Vorax had been caught off guard, but their technological superiority was a problem that wasn't going away. If anything, it was only going to get worse. Jax leaned back, staring at the ceiling as the adrenaline faded, leaving him feeling hollow and more than a little mortal. This was the life they'd chosen, running, fighting, surviving by the skin of their teeth. But for how much longer could they keep it up? As if reading his thoughts, Kira spoke up, her voice softer. "Can we really stand against them, Jax? They're not just stronger, they're smarter, and they've got more resources than we could ever hope to match." "We don't have to match them," Jax said, though he knew it was a thin argument. "We just have to outsmart them. And if there's one thing humans are good at, it's finding a way when there shouldn't be one." "That sounds awfully optimistic," Slip said, his usual sarcasm lacking its usual bite. "Yeah, well, sometimes I like to pretend the glass is half full," Jax replied, "even if it's really just leaking all over the floor." "Here's to puddles then," Grizz said, raising an imaginary glass. "May they never dry up." The crew chuckled, the tension easing just a bit. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to remind them why they were here, fighting against impossible odds. As the nebula's wrath continued its journey, battered but unbroken, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Vorax would come for them, and next time they wouldn't be so easily outmaneuvered. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, they were alive, and in a universe as unforgiving as this one, that was worth more than all the credits in the galaxy. "All right," Jax said, standing up with a wince as his bruised body protested. "Let's see if we can patch up this old girl and figure out our next step." "We're not done yet." With renewed determination, the crew got to work, each one knowing that their little rebellion against the Vorax was far from over. But if anyone could pull it off, it was them. A ragtag team of misfits with nothing to lose and a lot to prove. And if there was one thing Jax was certain of, it was that underestimating humans was a mistake the Vorax would soon regret. Captain Jax Meridian surveyed his crew with the kind of tired resolve usually reserved for people who had just realized they were out of toilet paper mid-visit. The nebula's wrath limped through space like a drunken pigeon, and the crew was beat, but there was still work to do. The Vorax might have given them a run for their money, but if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was pissing people off with a smile. "We need a new plan," Jax said, leaning against the main console. The sticky notes covered it like a paper plague, reminders of both past victories and screw-ups, something to hit them where it hurts. "Unless they're hurt by bad coffee, I'm out of ideas," Kira shot back from her station, the controls still looking worse than Slip's attempt at cooking. She had a knack for steering through chaos, but the Vorax were a different beast. Slip, with his perpetually disheveled aura, spun around in his chair, a wild gleam in his eyes. "What if we start a rumor? Something that'll make the Vorax implode from the inside. We don't need more guns. We need to use our brains." "Newsflash, Slip," Doc interjected, sorting through his dubious collection of bandages and vials. "The Vorax have a collective brain the size of a planet. We're working with, at best, a rock and a hard place." Grizz, who had taken a rare break from polishing his arsenal, scratched his chin. "What about those subversive memes you kept talking about, Slip? Weren't they supposed to be good for something other than wasting time?" "They're not just memes. They're weapons," Slip insisted, a touch defensive. "In the right hands, they can undermine authority, inspire rebellion, make people question everything. It's a digital Trojan horse. I prefer my Trojan horses with a side of explosives," Grizz said, but there was a hint of curiosity in his gruff voice. "Okay, so we infiltrate their networks with these memes," Jax said, starting to see the potential. "What's the plan?" "We make them question their leadership, their purpose, their scaly existence." "Pretty much," Slip confirmed, already pulling up potential designs. "We can target their social hubs, plant doubt, show them that even their top brass are fallible. Turn them into a bunch of existential crisis-ridden lizards." "Great, so our plan is to depress them to death," Doc said, shaking his head. "Sounds fun. Hey, if it works, I'll take it," Kira chimed in. "Better than dodging lasers every 2 seconds. "All right," Jax said, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "Slip, you and Kira work on distributing these memes. Make sure they hit the right channels and get past any firewalls." "On it," Captain Slip said, already absorbed in his digital world, fingers dancing over keys like a pianist at a cyber concert. Kira gave a mock salute. "Let's go make some reptilian minds explode." Grizz snorted. "If only their heads would explode literally." Doc, still perched on his crate, gestured around the ship. "And while you're all being digital provocateurs, I'll see if I can patch up this flying scrapyard." "Do your best, Doc," Jax said. "I'd rather not find out how breathable the vacuum of space is." The crew got to work, each member falling into their role like cogs in a very dysfunctional machine. Jax watched them with a mixture of pride and apprehension. They'd come a long way, but the road ahead was still littered with pitfalls and probably a few unexploded mines. Over at his corner, Slip was a blur of motion, pulling up Vorax communication channels and deploying his digital grenades. Kira assisted by navigating through the Vorax networks, her precision turning potential roadblocks into mere speed bumps. "Got it," Slip muttered, eyes glued to the screen. "The memes are in position. What's the caption?" Grizz asked, leaning over to catch a glimpse. Slip grinned. "Ever wondered why you're always the cannon fodder? Maybe it's not the humans you should be fighting." Kira laughed, a sound like glass breaking in a quiet room. "If that doesn't get them thinking, nothing will." The ship rumbled as Doc made his way to the engine room, grumbling under his breath about jury-rigged systems and the lack of decent medical supplies. Jax couldn't blame him. The ship was held together by sheer willpower and liberal applications of duct tape. "We're counting on these distractions to give us some breathing room," Jax said, addressing the crew. If we can get the Vorax to turn on themselves, it might just give us the edge we need. And if it doesn't, Doc's voice came over the intercom, a tinny crackle that was somehow both comforting and ominous. Then we improvise, Jax replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. After all, that's what we do best. The nebula's wrath continued its journey through the void, each member of the crew doing their part to keep them one step ahead of the Vorax. There was no telling if their plan would work, but at least they were trying. And in this universe, that counted for a hell of a lot. As the Iors dragged on, Jax found himself in the cockpit, staring out at the swirling mass of stars beyond. The cosmos was a beautiful, terrible place, and it reminded him of just how small and insignificant they were. But even the smallest pebble could cause a landslide. "Penny for your thoughts, Captain." Kira's voice broke through his reverie, and Jax turned to see her leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. "Just thinking about our chances," he said, gesturing at the vastness of space. "We're up against a fleet that could crush us without even noticing, yeah. But we've got something they don't," Kira replied, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Which is an insatiable need to prove we're not just some backward species from a little blue planet," she said with a smirk. "And maybe a healthy dose of insanity." Jax chuckled, the sound echoing through the cockpit. "I'll drink to that." "If only we had something better than engine coolant," Kira straightened, the humor fading from her face. "You think this will work? The whole meme thing, honestly?" Jax paused, considering. "I don't know, but it's worth a shot. We've faced worse odds before, true. I mean, remember that time on Zeta Prime?" Jax groaned. "Please don't remind me." "I still have nightmares about that giant slug," Kira laughed, the sound brightening the dim cockpit. "See, we've got history on our side, not to mention sheer stubbornness." As they settled into a comfortable silence, the ship continued its journey, the crew working tirelessly to keep them one step ahead of the Vorax. The odds were stacked against them, but Jax knew one thing for certain. As long as they were alive, they had a chance. Several Iors later, Slip's voice crackled over the intercom, pulling Jax from his thoughts. "Captain, you might want to see this." Jax made his way to the control room where Slip and Kira were hunched over their screens, eyes wide with excitement. "What's going on?" Jax asked, leaning over Slip's shoulder. Slip gestured at the screen. "It's working. The Vorax networks are lighting up like a Christmas tree. Their command structure is in disarray and we're seeing signs of dissent." Kira nodded, tapping her screen. "Looks like they're starting to question their orders. Some are even considering defecting." Jax felt a surge of hope, a rare sensation in their line of work. "This could give us the edge we need." "Yeah, but it's not going to last forever," Slip warned. "The Vorax aren't stupid. They'll figure it out eventually. Then we need to move fast," Jax said, his mind racing. "While they're distracted, we hit their supply lines. Cut them off at the knees." Grizz, who had joined them in the control room, cracked his knuckles in anticipation. "Now you're speaking my language, all right, everyone," Jax said, looking around at his crew. "Let's get to work. We've got a fleet to outsmart." The nebula's wrath roared to life, engines straining as they plotted a course for the Vorax supply routes. It was a risky move, but if they succeeded, it could cripple the Vorax's ability to fight back. As they flew through the void, Jax allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. They'd turned the Vorax's own strength against them, using human ingenuity and a touch of humor to sow chaos among their ranks. But the fight was far from over, and Jax knew better than to count his victories before they were won. The Vorax would come for them eventually, and when they did, they needed to be ready. For now, though, they had a plan. And in a universe as unforgiving as this, that was more than enough. "All right, team," Jax said, his voice steady and confident. "Let's go show them what a little human creativity can do." With that, the nebula's wrath plunged into the unknown, a ragtag crew of misfits with nothing to lose and everything to prove. They were fighting against impossible odds, but as long as they had each other, there was hope. And that, Jax thought with a grin, was worth more than all the stars in the galaxy. The nebula's wrath hurtled through the void, its engines groaning in protest like an old man getting up from a particularly uncomfortable chair. In the cockpit, Jack's Meridian felt the weight of the universe on his shoulders, a universe that seemed hell-bent on squashing them like space bugs. Slip was at the main console, still riding the high of their recent digital victory. "So, what's next, Captain?" "We keep poking the Vorax with our digital stick until they fall over. More like we poke until they get mad enough to squash us for real," Jax replied, rubbing the stubble on his chin thoughtfully. "We need to stay unpredictable, keep them guessing." Grizz leaned back in his chair, arms crossed like a cranky warlord contemplating his next battle. "Guessing's good, but I prefer a more straightforward approach. You know, like a well-placed detonation." "Subtle as ever," Kira muttered, guiding the ship with her usual flair for steering them away from certain death. "We don't exactly have the firepower to take on a Vorax fleet head-on." "Yeah," Slip added, "we're more of a flea on a dog's back, hoping the dog doesn't notice us. Or decides to scratch," Doc chimed in over the intercom, likely from the engine room where he was elbow-deep in grease and optimism. "Speaking of, this ship's held together by dreams and duct tape. How about we avoid the big boom plan?" But the universe, ever the malicious overseer, had different ideas. The console flared to life, alarms blaring like a drunk crashing a wedding. Vorax ships had appeared on their radar, bearing down with the kind of determination best reserved for tax collectors or ex-spouses. "Ah, crap," Jax muttered, staring at the incoming fleet. "Looks like the Vorax are here to say hello." Kira shot a glance at the screen. "And they've brought friends, lots of friends." "They've also brought the big guns," Slip said, stabbing at buttons with the calm of someone who knew panic was pointless but did it anyway out of principle. "Guess they didn't appreciate our memes." Grizz cracked his knuckles, a grin spreading across his face. "Well, if they want to dance, let's show them we know the steps." "Not much we can do against that kind of firepower," Jax said, the situation dawning on him like a bad joke told at a funeral. "We need to think." "Thinking's overrated," Grizz replied, reaching for the ship's modest arsenal. "Sometimes you just gotta hit him where it hurts and hope for the best." Doc's voice, tinny and laced with frustration, crackled over the intercom again. "Captain, unless you want the ship to become a very expensive space coffin, I suggest we find a nice, quiet corner of the universe to hide." "Hide? From them?" "Not likely," Jax said, his voice steady despite his stomach doing flips like an acrobat on a caffeine high. "We stay unpredictable, remember? Kira, evasive maneuvers. Let's give them the slip." "Pun intended?" Slip asked, a small smile on his lips despite the dire situation. "Always," Jax replied, strapping himself in. "Hold on and pray to whatever gods still listen to idiots like us." The nebula's wrath swung into action, engines roaring as Kira put her skills to the test. The ship banked hard, twisting and turning through the black, a drunken waltz of desperation and defiance. "Incoming fire!" Slip yelled, his eyes glued to the screen as bright streaks of energy lit up the void around them. "Weave, Kira, weave!" Jax shouted, the ship shuddering under the strain as if protesting its mistreatment. I'm weaving," Kira shot back, gritting her teeth as she maneuvered through the onslaught, the ship narrowly avoiding the Vorax weapons that sought to make them an afterthought in the universe's obituary section. "Doc, how's the ship holding up?" Jax barked over the comms, the situation feeling more hopeless by the second. "Let's just say I've got a bucket ready for the leaks," Doc replied, his voice a mix of sarcasm and resignation. "And I'm not talking about water." Grizz let out a bark of laughter that echoed through the cockpit like gunfire. "Fighting for our lives and he's worried about mopping up. We have to keep dodging," Jax said, trying to inject some hope into his voice. "We just need an opening." "An opening?" Slip asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We're one wrong move away from becoming space dust." "Just keep the faith," Jax insisted, though he wasn't entirely sure what faith they were supposed to keep. In themselves. In the idea that the Vorax would get tired of this one-sided battle and go home. "Faith doesn't fix a broken hull," Doc pointed out, his voice crackling with static and irritation. And it definitely doesn't stop Vorax plasma bolts. Suddenly, a blip appeared on the radar, not one of their own, but another ship. Smaller, faster, and clearly not Vorax. Incoming object, Slip said, eyes narrowing at the screen. Looks like someone else wants to join the party. Friendly? Kira asked, her voice tight with concentration as she continued to juke and jive through the chaos. Let's hope so, or we're really screwed, Jax replied. Slip, open a channel. Slip's fingers danced across the console. Channel open. Unidentified ship, Jax said, his voice steady despite the chaos. This is Captain Jax Meridian of the Nebula's Wrath. Either you're here to help or we're all about to have a very bad day. The response came almost immediately, a voice crackling over the comms. This is Captain Tessa Arlen of the Echo's Lance. Looks like you could use a hand. More like a miracle, Jax replied, relief washing over him. You here to deliver? Let's just say your memes got us thinking, Tessa replied, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. We've had enough of the Vorax's heavy-handed approach. Welcome to the club, Jax said, nodding at Kira to adjust their course. You got a plan. Plan's simple. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and get the hell out, Tessa replied, her voice all business now. We'll draw their fire, give you a chance to make a break. Risky, Jax said, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie with this unseen ally. But it might just work. Risky's our specialty, Tessa replied with a laugh. Now let's give these overgrown lizards something to think about. As the Echo's lance darted forward, weapons blazing, the Vorax fleet shifted its attention. For a moment, it was like watching a school of fish scatter in the presence of a predator, the Vorax caught off guard by this unexpected assault. Now's our chance, Kira said, her voice filled with determination. Let's make a run for it. Jax nodded, gripping his seat as the Nebula's Wrath surged forward, engines straining against the pull of inertia. The ship shot through the chaos, the stars blurring past like streaks of light on a rainy night. You know, if we survive this, drinks are on me, Jax said, a grin breaking through the tension. I'll hold you to that, Captain, Kira replied, the ship dodging and weaving with a grace that belied its patchwork construction. Let's just focus on surviving first, Slip added, his eyes flicking between the controls and the external view. As the Echo's lance continued its assault, Jax's mind raced. For a brief moment, it felt like they might actually get out of this mess alive. But the Vorax weren't beaten yet, and he knew better than to count on luck alone. Thanks for the save, Echo's lance, Jax said over the comms, his voice filled with gratitude. We owe you one. Maybe we'll call in that favor someday, Tessa replied, her voice light despite the danger. Just keep running and don't look back. With that, the Nebula's Wrath plunged further into the depths of space, leaving the chaos behind. But Jax couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was far from over. The Vorax would regroup, and when they did, they'd come at the humans with everything they had. But for now, they had a reprieve, a chance to regroup, lick their wounds, and plan their next move. And if there was one thing Jax was good at, it was making the most out of the slimmest opportunities. Let's find a quiet spot to lay low, Jax said, a sense of weary relief settling over him. We've got work to do. Yeah, Slip replied, the tension in his shoulders finally easing. And maybe fix that coffee machine while we're at it. Grizz let out a bark of laughter. Priorities right. As the ship drifted into the unknown, Jax allowed himself a moment of introspection. They'd come a long way from that ragtag group of misfits, and despite the odds stacked against them, they were still fighting. And that, Jax thought with a wry smile, was worth more than 1,000 victories. Besides, he'd always enjoyed a good underdog story. The Nebula's Wrath drifted through space, the only sounds inside the ship the hum of its engines and the occasional creak of a bulkhead that had seen better days. Jax Meridian sat in the captain's chair, the weight of the universe not so much on his shoulders as actively trying to flatten him. All right, folks, let's not get too comfortable, Jax said, breaking the silence. We've got a lot of Vorax out there pissed off and looking for us. And trust me, they're not the forgiving type. Kira glanced over from her controls, raising an eyebrow. Is this the part where you tell us you've got a brilliant plan to save our sorry asses? More like the part where I ask if anyone else has one, Jax replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. But now that you mention it, Slip leaned back in his chair, still jittery from their narrow escape. Oh great, here we go. This is gonna be one of those trust me it'll work schemes, isn't it? Would I ever steer you wrong? Jax asked, spreading his hands with mock innocence. Frequently, Doc piped up over the intercom, the sound of tools clanging in the background. But hey, we're still alive, so maybe there's something to be said for blind faith. Blind faith and duct tape, Jax corrected. The foundation of any good plan. Grizz chuckled, a sound like rocks tumbling downhill. So what's the idea, Cap? We can't exactly outgun the Vorax, no, Jax said, leaning forward, eyes alight with a spark of mischief. But we can outsmart them, or at least annoy them to death. Is that what passes for strategy these days? Kira asked, smirking. Annoyance. Hey, it's gotten us this far, Jax replied. But listen, we managed to make some friends out there, right? Tessa and her crew. And that got me thinking, that's dangerous, Slip muttered, earning a snort from Grizz. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Jax shot back. My point is, the Vorax aren't exactly winning any popularity contests. They've got half the galaxy under their thumb, and that can't sit well with everyone. Revolution in the stars. Doc's voice asked, skeptical but intrigued. That's a tall order even for us, not a revolution. Not yet, Jax said, warming to his theme, but a nudge. We've already been hitting them with memes, right? What if we crank that up to 11? Get the people in those territories to see they're not alone. Kira tapped her fingers on the console, considering. You think our crappy jokes and stupid memes are gonna start a movement? Stranger things have happened, Jax replied with a shrug. Humans are annoyingly good at cultural influence. We just need to give them something to rally around. Like what? Grizz asked, skeptical. You can't expect them to drop everything and pick up arms cause we made them laugh. No, but it's a start, Jax insisted. We get them thinking, talking. Maybe even poking holes in the Vorax's propaganda. It's not about fighting a war right now. It's about getting the ball rolling. How do we know they'll even see them? Slip asked, frowning. The Vorax control the networks pretty tightly. Well, we've got a few tricks up our sleeves. Slip, you got us into that Vorax database once before, right? Jax asked, his grin widening. Yeah, but that was a fluke, Slip admitted, scratching his head as if the answer was tangled in his hair. I don't think I can just waltz back in. You won't have to. Just leave the door open a crack. We'll work with what we've got. Doc, how's our tech holding up? About as well as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest, Doc replied, a hint of pride in his voice for making it work this long. But I'll keep it running. Great, Jax said, clapping his hands together. Now all we need is a message. A message? Kira asked, incredulous. We're going to change the tide of a war with a message, not just any message, Jax replied. The right one. Humans have a knack for stirring things up. We've done it on every planet we've landed on. Look where it's gotten us, over the barrel of a Vorax plasma cannon, Slip suggested. Okay, fair point. But who's to say it won't work in our favor this time? Jax countered, his tone defiant. We just need the right angle. Something that gets under the Vorax's scales. Something with a punch, Grizz added, thumping the wall for emphasis. Exactly, Jax agreed. Now let's brainstorm. What do the Vorax hate most, us? Doc said, deadpan. Besides us, Jax amended, though he had to admit Doc had a point. Chaos, Kira said thoughtfully. They like things neat and tidy, about as much as they like us out here making noise. Perfect. We'll give them chaos, Jax said, eyes gleaming with newfound purpose. Slip, I want you to put together a compilation. The best of the best, the memes and messages that'll stir the pot. Already on it, Slip replied, his fingers dancing across the console with a renewed vigor. We need something they can't ignore, Jax continued, and something their oppressed citizens will want to share. Something they'll laugh about, talk about, pass around like contraband, like a galactic underground, Kira added, catching the spirit. Exactly, Jax said. We start a chain reaction, get people asking questions. The Vorax hate questions, and when they start looking over their shoulders, that's when we move, Grizz said, catching on. They'll be too busy swatting flies to notice us slipping through. Right, Jax agreed. We keep them off balance. Make them question everything they've been told about their own invincibility. Doc's voice crackled over the comms again, this time with an edge of hope. You know, this just might work. If we can get one sector talking, it could spread like wildfire. And we're the arsonists, Jax said with a chuckle, feeling the weight lift just a little. Let's light this galaxy up. All right, Captain, Kira said with a nod, turning her attention back to the controls. Setting course for the nearest comms relay. We'll need to amplify our signal. Grizz, help Doc with whatever he needs to boost our systems, Jax instructed. And make sure we're ready for a quick exit if things go south. On it, Grizz said, already heading towards the engine room. Slip, keep working your magic. We need every network we can piggyback off. You got it, Captain, Slip replied, hunched over his console like a man possessed. As the crew set to work, Jax allowed himself a moment to breathe. Maybe it was a long shot, but sometimes all you needed was a good shot in the dark. The Vorax had underestimated them before, and this time they'd do it again at their own peril. For once, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. If their memes could spark even the smallest bit of defiance, then maybe they weren't as alone in this fight as they seemed. Hours passed in a blur of activity, the crew working together with a single-minded determination that belied their usual sarcastic banter. Slip's fingers flew over his keyboard, pulling together the best and brightest of human wit and irreverence, while Doc and Grizz worked on jury-rigging the ship's comms array to broadcast further than it had any right to. This is gonna either be genius or get us all killed, Kira commented, as she brought the ship into position near a conveniently unmonitored comms relay floating in the middle of nowhere. I'm voting for genius, Jax replied, though he knew better than anyone how thin the line between the two could be. Ready on my end, Slip announced, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. We're hooked into the relay. All systems go, Doc, Jax asked, looking up at the ceiling as if the engineer could see him through the metal. Engines are humming like a kitten, Doc replied, his voice confident. Or as close to it as this rust bucket can manage. Grizz, Jax asked, though he already knew the answer. Locked and loaded, Grizz confirmed, grinning like a kid in a candy store. All right then, Jax said, taking a deep breath. Let's throw a match into this powder keg. With a nod from Jax, Slip hit the button and the nebula's wrath roared to life, transmitting their message across the galaxy. It was a simple thing, really. A collection of images, jokes, and videos, all laced with a subversive humor that was undeniably human. But beneath the laughs and the jibes was a message of defiance, a call to arms for anyone who'd ever felt the Vorax boot on their neck. Message sent, Slip said, turning to face Jax with an expression that was equal parts exhilaration and terror. Now what? Now we wait, Jax replied, his eyes fixed on the void outside. And hope they're as tired of the Vorax as we are. The silence that followed was oppressive, the weight of their gamble pressing down on them like a physical force. But there was also a thrill to it, a sense of anticipation that made Jax's heart race. For better or worse, they'd set something in motion, and all they could do was wait and see where it led. Think they'll bite? Kira asked, her voice low and full of uncertainty. They'd better, Jax replied, staring into the endless night. Because if they don't, we're all gonna be on the menu. Time stretched on, each minute feeling like an eternity as they floated in the darkness. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. Reports started trickling in from the edges of Vorax territory, small uprisings, isolated acts of defiance, whispers of rebellion spreading like wildfire. It was working. Against all odds, their message was finding its mark. We did it, Slip said, disbelief and elation warring for dominance. People are actually responding. Of course they are, Jax replied, though his voice held more relief than confidence. Never underestimate the power of a well-timed joke, or a pissed-off populace, Grizz added with a grim smile. Now we just have to keep the momentum going, Jax said, the enormity of what they'd set in motion beginning to sink in. This is only the beginning. Yeah, and the Vorax won't take this lying down, Kira reminded him, her tone cautious. We've poked the hive. Now we need to be ready for the swarm. Let them come, Jax replied, his eyes fierce and unyielding. We've got something they'll never have, stubbornness. Slip suggested dryly. Hope, Jax said, surprising even himself. And a damn good sense of humor. As the nebula's wrath drifted on through the vastness of space, the crew settled into a newfound sense of purpose. Their little rebellion had taken root, and though the road ahead was fraught with danger, it was a road they were ready to travel. For better or worse, they were in this together. And together, they'd make the Vorax regret ever underestimating the power of a well-placed meme. All right, team, Jax said, settling back into his chair with a satisfied sigh. Let's make some noise. The nebula's wrath drifted through the void like a tin can being kicked down an alleyway. The crew was riding the high of their subversive success against the Vorax, even if the actual outcome was still pending. The usual hum of the engines was accompanied by the rhythmic clatter of Doc's spanner, echoing through the ship's patchwork corridors. Can anyone tell me why I've got a screwdriver and duct tape holding an engine together? Doc's voice crackled over the comms, as cheerful as a man awaiting a root canal. Because miracles are cheaper than spare parts, Jax offered, leaning against the ship's main console, which was more sticky notes than metal at this point. If this is a miracle, I'd love to see what a curse looks like, Doc shot back. Just don't ask too many questions. It might fall apart out of spite. Jax chuckled, though the laughter felt more like a preemptive strike against the stress gnawing at him. Keep it together, Doc. We've got Vorax to piss off some more. Music to my ears, Doc replied, sounding almost proud of the ship's tenuous state. Slip was still at his console, eyes glazed but focused, fingers dancing over keys like he was playing a deadly game of Space Invaders. He turned his chair with a creak that echoed the ship's age. I think we're about to see some fireworks. You mean the kind we planned, or the kind that means we're about to become space dust? Kira asked, not looking up from the controls. Her hands moved with precision, almost as if daring the universe to try something stupid. Hopefully the fun kind, Slip replied, though not convincingly. Vorax networks are lighting up like a Christmas tree. Our little rebellion is spreading through their systems faster than a cold in a kindergarten. Ah, the gift that keeps on giving, Grizz rumbled from the back, his laughter more a rumble of rocks tumbling down a mountain. I love it when a plan comes together, especially when it involves someone else doing the heavy lifting. Jax kept his eyes on the nebula-speckled void. Just remember, the Vorax have had it their way for a long time. They're not going to take this lying down. Even if we do manage to pull the rug out from under them, they'll just use it to strangle us. Optimism, it's what's for breakfast, Kira muttered, executing an elegant maneuver to steer clear of a drifting asteroid that had decided the laws of physics were merely suggestions. More like dinner, given how long we've been at this, Jax replied. But look, it's working. People are snapping out of it. They're finally questioning why they've been listening to a species that thinks subtlety is a dirty word. A bit of chaos goes a long way, Slip said, grinning like he'd just pulled off the galaxy's greatest heist. Vorax networks are in full meltdown mode. They've got more breaches than a cheese grater. Jax allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Good. And while they're distracted, we need to make our next move. Which is? Kira asked, raising an eyebrow, though she didn't look away from the myriad of buttons and switches. We've got to hit them where it hurts, Jax replied, tapping the main console to bring up a flickering star map of the Vorax Empire. Take out their communications hubs. Without them, they're just a bunch of angry lizards shouting into the void. Grizz snorted, a sound like gravel being crushed. Pissed off Vorax with no way to coordinate. That sounds like my kind of party. Doc's voice crackled back onto the comms. Just don't let them get too close. I'd hate for our little miracle to end in a fiery bang. Noted, Jax replied. Let's set a course for the nearest hub. It's time to give the Vorax a taste of their own medicine. Slip grinned, fingers already dancing over the keys, plotting a course for chaos and mayhem. Etta, not soon enough. Everyone prepare for a bit of turbulence, Kira warned, her voice steady despite her earlier sarcasm. This ride's about to get bumpy. As the ship lurched forward, Jax felt the weight of their mission settle comfortably on his shoulders. It was as if the universe had decided to give the underdogs a fighting chance, and by some ironic twist, they'd become the catalyst for change. They were a ragtag group of misfits, glued together by duct tape and dreams, but they were making a dent in the Vorax's well-crafted armor. The nebula's wrath careened through the stars with reckless abandon, the engines groaning in protest but holding firm. As they approached the target, a cold knot formed in Jax's stomach, a familiar sensation like preparing to dive into an ice-cold lake. All stations, Jax announced, his voice steady despite the chaos. Prepare for engagement, this might get hairy. Harry? Grizz chortled from his post. I think we've gone past Harry and straight to feral. Good thing we've got more lives than a pack of rabid cats, Slip said, though the humor in his voice was tinged with edge. Kira's hands flew over the controls. Engaging stealth mode. They won't see us coming until it's too late. Assuming we don't blow the stealth systems in the process, Doc added from his makeshift workshop in the guts of the ship. I've got a roll of duct tape and a prayer holding this thing together. Pray a little harder, Jax replied, eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching Vorax comm hub. We're going in hot. As the ship dove toward the hub, alarms blared and lights flashed, a veritable symphony of impending doom. The Vorax might not have seen them coming, but they were quick to react, mobilizing defenses with terrifying efficiency. How are we looking, Slip? Jax called, the ship shuddering under the strain of sudden maneuvers. Like a fish in a barrel, Slip replied, his fingers a blur across the console. But we're not the fish, and they're about to find out. Good enough for me, Jax said, gripping the armrests of his chair as if sheer willpower could keep the ship intact. The nebula's wrath sliced through the Vorax defenses with a mix of cunning and sheer audacity. Kira's deft handling kept them one step ahead of the enemy fire, weaving through the chaos with the grace of a dancer. Almost there, Kira announced, teeth gritted against the strain. Doc Grizz on my mark, Jax ordered, watching the targeting systems lock onto the comm hub. We're going to make a very loud, very expensive point. Ready? Grizz replied, a dangerous edge to his voice. Doc's voice came through calm and steady. Just say the word. Jax took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. Fire! The ship shuddered as the weapons discharged, streaks of energy cutting through the void and slamming into the comm hub with deadly precision. The resulting explosion lit up the darkness, a brief, brilliant blaze of defiance against the oppressive Vorax regime. Direct hit, Kira confirmed, her voice tinged with satisfaction. That's one less thing they'll be using to bark orders, Slip said, an edge of triumph in his tone. Let's not stick around for the reprimand, Jax said, already plotting their escape. Kira, get us out of here. With pleasure, Kira replied, pulling the ship away from the smoking ruins of the comm hub and into the safety of the void. As the nebula's wrath sped away from the scene of their latest triumph, Jax allowed himself a moment to breathe. It was a small victory in a much larger war, but it was theirs. And if nothing else, they'd proven that even in the darkest corners of space, a little bit of human ingenuity could go a long way. Think they'll send a thank you note? Grizz asked, his chuckle a low rumble in the aftermath. More like a barrage of plasma fire, Slip replied, though there was a grin in his voice. Then let's not be here to receive it, Jax said, settling back into his chair as the ship settled into a safer trajectory. We've got more work to do, and who knows, by the time we're done the Vorax might just wish they'd never heard of us. You mean more than they already do? Kira asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Exactly, Jax replied, feeling the familiar surge of purpose fill him again. Let's keep them guessing. We've got a galaxy to save, after all. And with that, the nebula's wrath continued its journey through the stars, an unlikely beacon of hope in a galaxy that needed it more than ever. They were a crew of misfits, held together by duct tape and determination, but they'd be damned if they didn't take down the Vorax one meme, one explosion, and one laugh at a time. So they pressed on, leaving chaos and hope in their wake, a testament to the power of human defiance, and the simple but profound truth that sometimes all you needed to start a fire was a spark. The nebula's wrath drifted through the aftermath of chaos, a drifting silhouette against the vast emptiness of space. Inside, the crew basked in the glow of their recent triumph against the Vorax, a victory celebrated not with champagne, but with the smug satisfaction that only comes from kicking a bully's shin and getting away with it. Captain Jack's Meridian leaned back in his chair, feet propped on the flickering main console, the star map displaying the scattered remnants of what was once the Vorax communications nexus. "So that's what punching above your weight class feels like," he mused, a crooked grin tugging at his lips. Slip, still glued to his console like it was a new video game that simply couldn't be paused, snorted. "More like a mosquito bite. Annoying, itchy, and just enough to make them slap themselves silly trying to squash us." Doc's voice crackled over the comms, laced with that familiar sarcastic edge. "I'm just glad we didn't end up the bug on their windshield. Ships held together better than my last relationship." Kira rolled her eyes, her fingers dancing over the controls with familiar ease. "Your last relationship was with a house plant, Doc, and it still died on me," Doc retorted. "This bucket of bolts, though, it's the clingy sort. Just can't get rid of it." Grizz's laughter rumbled through the ship, a deep, gravelly sound that vibrated through the bulkheads. "I'd say we make a pretty damn good team for a bunch of rejects." "That's the spirit," Jax replied, feeling the knots of tension in his shoulders slowly start to unwind. "Misfits or not, we've got a galaxy to keep on its toes." A comfortable silence fell over the crew as they each took a moment to reflect. The Vorax might have been knocked off balance, but their fight wasn't over yet. The thought of humanity seizing control of the wormhole crossroads lingered in the air like the smell of burnt coffee, a little bitter, a little sweet, and utterly intoxicating. "Think they're crying into their collective cereal bowls?" Kira asked, breaking the silence with a smirk. "Oh, definitely," Slip replied, his grin as wide as it was wicked. "Our little rebellion spread like wildfire through their systems. It's like watching a domino cascade, a beautiful disaster." Jax couldn't help but chuckle. "It's a start, but we're going to need a hell of a lot more than a viral meme campaign to keep them down." Doc's voice cut in, practical as ever. "Speaking of campaigns, might be a good time to resupply. We're running low on duct tape, and I'm starting to consider using Grizz's beard as an adhesive substitute." "Not the beard," Grizz protested, his fingers instinctively going to the thick, wiry mass on his chin. "That's crossing a line, Doc. I think it's a great idea," Slip chimed in, mischief twinkling in his eyes. "Might actually improve the ship's decor." Jax shook his head, amused at the banter. "We'll hit the nearest friendly outpost, see if we can stock up before we make our next move." Kira's brow furrowed as she punched in the coordinates. "Friendly outpost. Is there such a thing in this galaxy?" "Well, maybe not friendly, but less likely to shoot us on sight is my definition of friendly these days," Jax replied dryly. Slip chuckled, his fingers tapping out a rhythm on the console. "Guess we're setting new standards for interstellar friendship. Shoot first, ask questions never." "Sounds about right," Jax agreed. "And while we're at it, maybe we can upload another round of chaos into the Vorax networks. Keep them busy." Doc's voice carried over with a tinge of pride. "I've got a few choice viruses cooked up. Nothing says hello like a good old system crash." "Make sure it's the gift that keeps on giving," Kira added, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of subversive warfare. "I want them feeling this one." Jax reclined further into his chair, contemplating the path ahead. The Vorax were reeling, but it wouldn't last. Their collective mind wouldn't tolerate such a blow without retaliation. "We'll need to be more unpredictable than a cat on caffeine," he said, thinking out loud. Grizz chuckled. "Have you met us, Cap? Unpredictable is our middle name. Right after disaster waiting to happen." "Good," Jax said, his tone firm. "Because until this galaxy's free from Vorax control, we're going to keep turning their world upside down, shaking it like a snow globe. And when we're done, maybe, just maybe, the universe will start to make a little more sense." Slip leaned back, folding his arms behind his head, looking like the cat that got the cream. "Who knew the path to peace involved pissing off an entire empire? Call it cultural warfare," Jax suggested with a smirk. "Turns out humor and chaos are more potent than any plasma cannon." Kira shook her head with a grin. "If that's the case, we must be the most heavily armed ship in the galaxy." The nebula's wrath floated onward, a patchwork beacon of defiance in the vast darkness, navigating the strange new course the crew had set. One where laughter, cunning, and sheer audacity might just be the keys to victory. Days passed in a blur of repairs and plot weaving, the crew settling into the rhythm of rebellion. Each member played their part in the grand game of galactic chess, and it was almost possible to forget the weight of the task. Almost. Jax found himself in the galley, staring at the defunct coffee machine like a man confronting a long-lost lover. The machine had given up the ghost after their last skirmish, and its absence was felt like a phantom limb. Slip wandered in, catching sight of Jax's wistful gaze. "Still mourning the coffee, eh? You know, there's a special kind of hell reserved for broken coffee machines," Jax replied, shaking his head. "Right next to printers that always seem to run out of ink." "Maybe the next outpost'll have a spare," Slip suggested, not sounding particularly hopeful. "Here's hoping," Jax said, though he knew the odds were slimmer than a Vorax's sense of humor. The door slid open to reveal Doc, who held up a small, jury-rigged contraption triumphantly. "Behold, the solution to our caffeinated crisis." Slip eyed the device warily. "What is it? An espresso machine or a death ray?" "A little bit of both," Doc replied, placing it on the table with a flourish. "It's a prototype. Might give us the caffeine kick we need or send us into cardiac arrest. Either way, it's exciting." Jax chuckled, appreciating Doc's ingenuity. "You've outdone yourself, Doc. Just don't let it explode before we get our fix." Doc winked. "Wouldn't dream of it, Cap." As the crew gathered for a rare moment of downtime, the conversation turned to the wormhole crossroads, humanity's unexpected prize in their ongoing struggle. "Think we can hold it this time?" Kira asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. "Depends on how much chaos we can sow in the meantime," Slip replied. "Vorax won't know what hit him if we keep our momentum." Grizz shrugged, a massive gesture that seemed to shift the room. "I say we make it our mission to be the worst neighbors possible. Set off fireworks, throw parties at odd hours, clog their space lanes. And if that doesn't work, we can always go back to Plan B," Doc added with a grin. "General mayhem and tomfoolery." Jax listened, pride swelling in his chest despite the challenges ahead. His crew, his family, was ready to fight until the last breath, to stand their ground against overwhelming odds and laugh in the face of adversity. "They've underestimated us," Jax said, his voice steady and sure. "And in this game, that's the biggest mistake they can make." Kira nodded, her expression serious but with a twinkle of mischief in her eyes. "Then let's show them what a bit of underestimation can do." The nebula's wrath continued its course, a small yet indomitable force against the vastness of space, leaving a trail of defiance and hope in its wake. Against all odds, they'd proven that sometimes the pen, or in this case, a well-timed hack, was mightier than the sword. And with each victory, the galaxy felt a little less like a cold, indifferent void, and more like a place where dreams, duct tape, and determination could make all the difference. As they prepared for the battles yet to come, the crew of the nebula's wrath knew one thing for sure. They might be misfits, held together by laughs and loyalty, but they'd be damned if they didn't make history along the way. And so, with a course set for the unknown and a future as uncertain as the stars, they pressed on, ready to rewrite the rules of the universe. One snarky comment, one daring maneuver, and one victorious battle at a time.